Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to this month's Special Collection Spotlight session. This month I'm going to be talking about some of the books in our collection which give us insight into the histories of some of the local architects. So there have been a number of architects whose names are inextricably linked with Nottingham, and we have various bits in our collection which allow us to illustrate that. Now, I'm not going to talk about Watson Fothergill. Our library member Lucy Brower, who does the amazing tours, can tell you far more about him than I can. And in our collection, we don't have an awful lot that specifically relates to him. But I have got 4 other architects, with another one who's going to sneak in to tell you about and to show you some books of. So the first book I want to show you this time is this one here. This is, well, the title describes it as History and Description of the Old and New Trent Bridges, Nottingham. But the title page is slightly more expansive, if I can get to it. So yes, so History of the Old Trent Bridge with a descriptive account of the new bridge in Nottingham, illustrated by photographs. This part of the book is written by M.O. Tarbeton. I think it's Tarbeton, it might be Tarboton, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. And there is another section towards the back of the book which I'll show you in a bit. So this book is really good. It includes photographs of the old and new Trent bridges. So this photograph, and there's another one further on from a different angle, shows you the old Trent Bridge still in situ after the new one had been built. So the old Trent Bridge we're fairly certain that there had been a bridge there in the same site from at least the 12th century, and despite having been washed away at one point and had different phases of reconstruction, the bridge itself stayed in place until the late Victorian era, when plans were put in place to replace it with something that was more suitable to the amount of traffic that was being used at the time. And the new Trent Bridge was built almost on the same site but at a slightly different angle. And so you can see in this photograph the old Trent Bridge still in situ here, with the new one coming off at a slightly different angle to the old one. And this book, which was published in 1871, includes descriptions and also photographs. So this is a photograph from a slightly different angle, probably taken from the same position but twisted round, so you can see the new Trent Bridge with the old one still in situ here. And what this book also includes, which is rather fantastic, is close-ups of the 8 armorial shields which are had been carved to decorate the new Trent Bridge, together with information about what the shields represent. So for instance, this is the first one, and it represents William I, William the Conqueror, and the fact that he first established the castle in Nottingham. So Nottingham was an important town in the centre of England at the time of the Norman conquest. And what I quite like about this is that, as it says, the shield is suspended from the hilt of the conqueror's sword, which is rather excellent. And then, yes, the book goes on to give illustrations of each of the different shields, or the pairs of shields, and explains what they are and how the designs were arrived at, which is quite fascinating. I personally have to say I hadn't noticed the shields on the bridge, but now that I've seen this, it's maybe making me want to go and actually have a proper look at them. So this description of the bridge, as I showed on the title page, was written by M.O. Tarbeton, and this is Maurice O Tarbeton, which is an absolutely fantastic name. And Maurice O Tarbeton was he was one of the most influential architects in Nottingham at the time. So he was actually born in Leeds in 1834, but he fairly swiftly moved to Wakefield. He became the borough engineer in Wakefield in 1855, and in 1859 he moved to Nottingham and became borough engineer here. And he held that position until 1880. Now, he became a member of the Institute of Civil Engineers in 1862, and as I say, he was an important figure in the history of Nottingham, not just for the design of the new Trent Bridge, but various other buildings, many of which are still in existence, which he also designed. So he designed the bell tower in the Arboretum, he designed the University College building, which is now the Arkwright building of the Nottingham Trent University. He designed Papplewick Pumping Station, and that last one shows is a way in to talk about the fact that he was particularly interested in improving sewage and waterworks for the town. So he was responsible for culverting the River Leen. The River Leen was up until that point just open, and it was used as something of a dumping ground, and it was identified as a source of disease, and Tarbeton proposed getting it culverted, which did eventually happen. He also oversaw the first underground sewerage system in Nottingham, which at the time was the first underground sewerage system in the UK outside of London. So he was very much at the sort of the cutting edge of this area of work. And in addition to all his architectural work, he also had a strong interest in meteorology, and he recorded weather observations for Nottingham for many years during the time that he lived here. Now, Tarbeton was also a member of Bromley House, of course, as all the best people were. So he was a member of Bromley House between 1865 and 1890, and in 1878 we have a note in our records that he gifted the library a map of the enlarged borough of Nottingham. So in that period there were discussions about civic boundaries, just as there are today, and the borough of Nottingham was enlarged in the late 1870s, and Tarbeton was instrumental in that and donated a map of the enlarged borough to the library, which we still have. It's huge. It's one of the ones that I have to move all the furniture out of the way and lay it out on the floor in order to actually get the map out. So maybe in the future I will use that in one of my spotlight sessions, but it might have to climb up on some kind of scaffolding to actually get an image of it. But we do still have it, and it's really nice to know that that's where it came from. Okay, so yes, so that's Tarbeton, and as I say, he designed a number of different buildings, but he is mostly remembered nowadays for the design and construction of the new Trent Bridge. Now, in this book, after Tarbeton's description, we then have an extra section, which is the archaeology of the Trent Bridge by S. Dutton Walker, architect, an abstract of a paper read before the Society of Antiquaries in London. So this has further photographs, it has a plan, and as I say, photographs of parts of the old Trent Bridge, and it was written and is included from, excuse me, let me get through my notes. Yes, S. Dutton Walker. S. Dutton Walker is Samuel Dutton Walker, and he's the extra architect who I mentioned is sneaking into my talk this afternoon. So Samuel Dutton Walker, he was a very close contemporary of Tarbeton. He was born a year earlier and he died a couple of years earlier, but almost exactly the same age. And he was a Nottingham architect. He was born in Nottingham, and he was very heavily involved in the Nottingham School of Art. And as an architect, he went into partnership with John Howitt and was partners with him in Nottingham for a number of years in the 1870s and 1880s. And he designed various buildings and parts of Nottingham. He designed churches, houses, industrial premises, including King John's Arcade on Bridlesmith Gate, which is still there today. And Dutton Walker was also a member of Bromley House. He was a member of Bromley House from 1870 to 1901, and he gifted us various copies of academic papers that he'd read for the Society of Antiquities and so on. But he leads me on to the second book, which I'm going to show as a part of this. Very, very large. It's not really a book, it's more a folder full of things. But these are large-scale prints of some of the photographs from Dutton Walker's article at the back of the book about Old Trent Bridge. So we have these rather nice prints of the Old Trent Bridge. This one here with a little chap sat having a picnic or something underneath the arches of Trent Bridge. And what this folder also contains, which is particularly interesting, if I move the photographs out of the way, is this at the back here. Presented to the Committee of Bromley House Library by S. Dutton Walker, 1874. And this folds out and is, I think, the original of the drawing, the scale drawing of the old Trent Bridge, so the elevation of the old Trent Bridge, and then the plan of where the old Trent Bridge was and where the new Trent Bridge was built and how the two link together with each other. And this, as I showed, this does appear in a smaller version within that book, but it seems that we've got the original drawing of this, and on such a very large size that makes it actually quite useful and interesting to look at. So that's Tarbeton and Dutton Walker. Both important to the history of Nottingham and Nottingham architecture, but the thing that links them particularly and that they are mostly remembered for is this interest in the building of the new Trent Bridge. Okay, so the second architect, well, the second or third architect that I want to talk about as part of this session is T.C. Hein, who is mostly remembered for the work that he did on Nottingham Castle. And that's the first of the books that I've got out that I want to talk about in relation to this, is the commemorative book about Nottingham Castle, which I'll come to in a minute. But Thomas Chambers Hein, he was born 1813, lived until 1899. He was born in Covent Garden and did an architectural apprenticeship in London before moving to Nottingham in 1837. Whilst in Nottingham, he was in various architectural partnerships, and he was active in architecture and design in the city until around about 1830. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects in 1878, which is an important date when we talk about the castle. But as well as the castle, he also designed many churches and rectories in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. And the other particularly important and interesting thing in relation to T.C. Hein's work is that he was appointed to plan and design various of the buildings in the park. So the park near Nottingham Castle, which was previously the Royal Deer Park, and then became, as we know it today, the housing estate of the park. So the park was owned by the Dukes of Newcastle, who owned the site of the castle, and they decided to build houses on it in the early 19th century. So the first houses appeared on the park in around about 1829, and various architects were involved in the project at that point. It was the 4th Duke of Newcastle who first started building houses. The 5th Duke of Newcastle appointed T.C. Hein to the project in 1854, and he was appointed to plan the layout and also design many of the houses. And he also had the position that he was able to approve the designs of other buildings that had been designed by other architects before they were allowed to be built in the area of the park. So he was responsible for many of the buildings in the park, including the park tunnel, which obviously is a rather fantastic element of that particular area. But as well as that, he also designed some of the really impressive lace warehouses in the lace market. The Birkins building and the Adams building were both T.C. Hein. In the 1850s, he designed a number of different railway stations, and he also designed Nottingham High School. So he was quite active and designed a lot of important buildings in the area anyway. But the big thing that he's remembered for is that in 1875, he was appointed to the project to renovate the then derelict ducal mansion on the site of Nottingham Castle to turn it into the public museum and art gallery, which it was to become. So yes, he led an interesting life, based in Nottingham for most of his life. He died here in his family house on Regent Street in Nottingham, and as an interesting aside, his eldest surviving child was a girl named Mary Millicent Hein, and she trained as a nurse and was instrumental in the founding of Nottingham Children's Hospital as well. So as a family, they had a lot of influence in what was happening in Nottingham at that time. So this book is it's a commemorative book, but not commemorative after the date of the opening of the castle, because this book was published in 1876 when the castle restoration project, the renovation project, was only part way through. So this book was partly published in order to raise funds for the project of renovating the ducal mansion to turn it into the castle museum. So that project started, as I say, in 1875. This book was published a year later, and the castle eventually opened in 1878. So this book is basically a history of Nottingham in terms of, it's couched in terms of things that are relevant to the castle and the site of the castle. But it has a timeline down the side, and it has information about basically things which happened in Nottingham in the various periods that it's talking about. Now, the way that this book was published is quite interesting. It includes blank pages. So it has numbered pages, but between each numbered page there are blank pages, usually 3 blank pages between each numbered page of text. And this particular copy of this book gives an illustration of what that was for. This is a copy of this book. We've got 2 or 3 copies of this in the library collection. This one is from the James Ward collection, and long-term viewers of my Spotlight sessions will have heard me mention the James Ward collection many, many times before. But James Ward was a local collector, a local historian, and he donated to the library in the early 20th century his entire collection of local history books. And the reason that they're, well, it's a lovely collection anyway, but one of the reasons why they're particularly interesting is because James Ward had a habit of buying books, getting them rebound with extra pages in, and then sticking extra things onto those pages, almost like a scrapbook. So we have letters and correspondence and newspaper articles and so on. And that's what he's done with this book. But I think that is, that in this particular case, the book was published specifically in order to allow people to add their own illustrations to the book. So on the very front page, we have a little leaflet that is a reminiscence of the late T.C. Hein, written by William Stevenson. And then on the frontispiece, we have an inscription which indicates that this copy of this book was originally given by T.C. Hein 4 years after its publication, so 1880, but it was given by T.C. Hein to S.F. Cresswell, who lived at North Rep's Rectory, which is near Norwich. And I've found a little bit of information about S.F. Repton. Samuel Francis Cresswell, DD, so he was a Doctor of Divinity. He studied at St John's College in Cambridge, from where he graduated in 1859, and clearly went to his living at North Rep's Rectory just outside Norwich. And obviously he was personally known to T.C. Hein, who presented this copy to him. Underneath that, we have an inscription from James Ward. I can't read the first word. Maybe extra? Yes, actually, maybe it is extra. Extra illustrated by James Ward. And so he's added extra things. He's stuck things into the book. So this rather lovely illustration of what the weekday cross in Nottingham may have looked like in the early mid-18th century. And then on various of the pages, there are extra things stuck in. So a rather nice early Nottinghamshire banknote, obviously has been cancelled, so couldn't be used for any value, but with an illustration of the castle on the banknote. I love that. As someone who loves coins and banknotes, that's a particularly fine one. And then many, many photographs, and there are a few newspaper cuttings and all sorts of things that he's stuck in to illustrate the things which are going on in the story. So this is an illustration of Mortimer, Isabel's lover, Mortimer, being captured by the troops of Edward III in Nottingham Castle at the time at the point in the book where the illustration, where the text is talking about Queen Isabella and the capture of Mortimer and Mortimer's hole up at the castle. So this book is relatively interesting in its own right, but the fact that this is James Ward's copy and that he's stuck all these extra illustrations in makes it even more interesting than the other copies of this book that we've got. And that makes this, I think, a really nice kind of record of and respect of the work that T.C. Hein was doing in order to get the castle up and running. Because T.C. Hein wrote this book as well. He wrote the text of this. And T.C. Hein was himself something of an antiquarian. He published various papers and pamphlets about various different historical things, mostly to do with Nottingham. And just as an example, I've got out this, which is a copy of a transcription that T.C. Hein did of the earliest mention of the rock caverns in the park in Nottingham. So it's got some really rather nice antiquarian drawings of the rock caverns. These are still there. They are behind a row of houses now on Castle Boulevard, facing the Castle Marina where the Sainsbury's and things are. So you can't see much of them then. From a historian's point of view, this is quite fun because this, and it's repeated in the book itself, gives an idea of the slightly fanciful interpretations that the early antiquarians were giving for the rock caves in Nottingham, and the very early date that they'd assigned to them, which we now believe is not really accurate. But they felt that these caves were possibly used as Roman crematoria and for storing Roman cremated remains in the little niches in the rock, which is almost certainly not true. The caves are almost certainly medieval, if not post-medieval, and certainly weren't used for storing Roman remains. But this is obviously a side of T.C. Hein, a side of his personal interest, together with the rather fantastic James Ward's copy of the book about the castle. Okay, so this is the third part of my spotlight session on Nottingham architects, and the third architect that I want to talk about is Harry Gill. And in order to illustrate what we have in the collection relating to Harry Gill, I've got this book out here. Now, you've heard of Harry Gill before. I did bring out another one of his books in July last year when I was doing a spotlight session on churches, but this particular book is of special relevance to Bromley House. So it's Nottingham in the 18th century, especially with reference to domestic architecture. And this particular book is actually a reprint of a paper which Gill put into the Transactions of the Thoroton Society in 1912. So in 1912 it appeared in the Thoroton Transactions. 1913 this reprint came out as a separate book. And as I say, it talks about the domestic architecture of Nottingham in the 18th century. And it includes early photographs and line drawings of elements of the architecture which remained in the late Victorian period and in the Edwardian period when Gill was writing this. And obviously this is of particular relevance to Bromley House because there are a number of pictures in here of what Bromley House was like at the beginning of the 20th century. So I shall show you the Bromley House pictures. First one opposite page 68, we have a rather lovely picture of the hallway. So this is the hallway and the staircase. You can see at the time the hallway still had a plaster ceiling, and what you can see here is the columns that led into the kind of open front room area, which is now MSR newsagents. And there was a similar arrangement on the other side, which led into the bit which is now Bernardo's. So old photographs like this are fantastic, just for showing us the way that the building was at various points in the past. Obviously, various changes have happened to Bromley House over the years, mostly in relation to the fact that the library needed to raise funds in order to keep going. And we're very glad that it did, but it does mean that Bromley House has lost some of its earlier architectural features. The staircase, of course, is still there, but the hallway that you can just see peeking into the side of the picture there, we don't have anymore. So the next one opposite page 75 is absolutely mad. Here we are. So this is two fireplaces from Bromley House. This fireplace is still here. This fireplace is, you can see, you'll probably recognise the picture. This is behind the counter. So we've got the dial of the wind vane on the side there. We've still got the picture in situ where it was originally placed, where it was intended to be, and we've still got most of this. We don't have the actual fire surround, of course, because we've got the storage heater there now, but most of this is still in situ. So you could, if you want to just spin slightly, you could show it off out there behind the counter. So with Sally making an impromptu appearance in the spotlight session. So the picture is still there and the fireplace is mostly still in situ. The other fireplace on this picture, very much no longer in situ. This was in the hall, so we suspect that this was downstairs in one of the rooms that are now shops, but it's completely over the top, incredibly elaborate. It includes the coat of arms of Smith, who built the house, and his wife, and a stylised representation of a female figure. We have others of those in the plasterwork on the stairs as well, so we're not sure who that was meant to be. But this is the royal coat of arms of, I believe, George II. And as you can see, the fire surround went all the way up and touched the ceiling. So this is a completely over-the-top elaborate piece of work, and as I say, it is no longer there. It's not hidden behind any panelling or anything, unfortunately, and I suspect it is no longer in existence. But this is one of the interesting things that's in this book, showing us what there used to be in Bromley House. The other one is opposite page 78. These are some of the little bits of plaster work. The plaster panels don't survive anymore, but we have still got some of the friezes and things. And interestingly, in this part, Harry Gill talks about the fact that some of the best of this plaster work is in the Society's room. Now, that's another little bit of Bromley House history. The Thoroton Society, which obviously is the local history society in Nottingham, used to be based in Bromley House. Actually, on the door, we've still got a nameplate over the letterbox which says Bromley House Library, Thoroton Society. So members of the Thoroton Society, like Harry Gill, would have been very familiar with the interior of Bromley House as well as the exterior. They had their society meetings here, and I found a reference in our papers to the fact that in 1916 somebody called Harry Gill was a tenant within Bromley House. Whether it's the same Harry Gill or not, I don't know, and whether that was in his capacity with the Thoroton Society or whether it was in a private capacity, I have no extra information, unfortunately. It's just one of those mysterious little snippets that we get in the minute books. So it's possible that Harry Gill had an even closer association with Bromley House, but otherwise he definitely still knew the house well from being a member of the Thoroton Society. So Harry Gill, he was born 1858, lived until 1925, so he could potentially have been a tenant here in 1916. And he was an architect in Nottingham. He created a number of churches, domestic houses, and he was, if he's particularly remembered for anything, it's that he designed an awful lot of the war memorials that went up after the First World War. So a lot of the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire 1920s war memorials were designed by Harry Gill. So he was also an antiquarian, as I say. He was very active in the Thoroton Society. He's published various books. The one that I showed in July was about English parish churches, this one about Nottingham in the 18th century. We have others. We have one of he wrote a history of the castle, and within the Thoroton Society transactions there are a number of articles that Harry Gill wrote too. So as well as being an architect in Nottingham in the late 19th and early 20th century, he was also very active in the research and presentation of the history of Nottingham too. Okay, so this is the fourth and final part of my spotlight session on Nottingham architects, and the last architect which I want to talk about is T.C. Howitt. And the book which I've got out in order to talk about Howitt is this one here, rather lovely. I may have saved the best till last. So this is a souvenir of a commemorative of the opening of the new council house in the Market Square, with the exchange buildings, the shopping arcade, everything that was underneath it as well. As you can see, this is a rather nicely produced booklet. It's printed on very thick paper. It's lovely, you know, this lovely cream and gold and brown design. Embossed cover and gilt, and the entire book, having been printed in 1929, is in this rather lovely Art Deco style, with the Art Deco font and all the little decorative touches throughout it. And the book itself is basically a history of the building, and includes a number of photographs showing off the new building. This is a photograph of the grand opening. You can see hundreds of thousands of people all crowding into the Market Square, the square with its fountains and the processional party heading up. The foundation stones were laid in 1927, and the building was opened by the Prince of Wales, who later went on to very briefly be Edward VIII, in 1929. So just over 2 years it took to build the council house. As well as this picture of the opening, which includes, as we spotted earlier today, a host of people who were stood actually up on top on the roof and on the pediment of the council house, which seems a little scary. But then it goes on to include pictures, photographs of the council house outside and in, I rather like this one. I think that's a really nice shot, actually, looking out through the loggia at the left lion, our famous left lion, looking very kind of. It's clearly the lions have just recently been carved, looking very sharp and angular and very fine there. And then it goes on to include other pictures of the interior of the council house, the bits that you might not usually get to see. There's pictures of the council chambers and so on. And also, if we move towards the back, there is a picture that shows just how proud they were of all their facilities. We have a picture of a typical lavatory with marble floors and fittings. So this is what the toilets looked like in the council house when it was first opened. Very nice, very stylish 1920s styling there, but so still, I mean, it looks relatively modern actually looking at it. And then we go on to get some illustrations of the shopping arcade underneath the dome as looking up from the ground, and also a rather nice picture of the construction of the dome. So this is obviously the framework, the steel that's underneath the dome, and a few rather nice extra pictures there. So this is a rather lovely book. This was written by somebody named Frank Granger, produced in 1929 for the commemoration of the actual opening of the council house. And the council house, of course, was, well, still is, one of the most recognisable buildings that was designed by T.C. Howitt. So Thomas Cecil Howitt, he was born in Hucknall in 1889. In 1904, he was apprenticed to an architect in Nottingham whose name was Albert Nelson Bromley. So that's an interesting little link there as well. I don't think anything to do with the Bromley family who named the house that obviously our library's in. But he was apprenticed to an architect, Albert Bromley. In 1914, he became the company architect for Boots, but only for a very short time, because when the war broke out, he signed up to go and fight in the First World War. On his return from the fighting, he joined the City Engineering Department in 1919, and he was appointed City Architect in 1928. He designed various buildings, a lot of domestic architecture, some well-received housing estates and those kinds of things. And then in 1930, he decided to set up his own business, to move away from Nottingham City Council, set up his own business. And actually his offices were in the exchange buildings in the council house construction that he had designed and was instrumental in creating. He designed various buildings, including some important buildings elsewhere in the country, not just in Nottingham. So buildings such as Baskerville House in Birmingham, the Falcon Hotel in Lincoln. He designed various Odeon cinemas, which is were obviously very well renowned for their architecture, very cutting edge 1920s style architecture. And the Newport Civic Centre as well was also one of his. So T.C. Howitt, mostly renowned in Nottingham for the design of the council house, lived in Nottingham for basically his whole life and died here in 1968. So that was a quick tour through just a few of the items in the collection which relate to architects of areas of Nottingham, architects who've lived in Nottingham. There are many other items in the collection that will give us extra information about these people and about their works, but I hope this little snapshot has been of interest. Most of these books are available for members to borrow. The James Ward collection copy of the Nottingham Castle book can't be borrowed but can be examined within the library. So let us know if you want to look at any of these, and I hope you'll join me next time for the next Spotlight session.